I started off started this off as trying to solve my own problem, because with my two previous game startups, I wasn't able to find good engineers that I wanted to recruit. So it started off from there, and eventually realized that this is a much bigger problem, and I think this could turn into something much bigger than what I originally sort of imagined, right? Um, so yeah, tell us a little bit about what product management is all about, because majority of people, I don't think, understand the scope of
Yeah.
what product is, what product management is, and how does it sort of play a role in the game industry.
Right. Right. Before jumping into that, quick background about myself, so everybody gets some context. I've been working in the game industry for a decade now. I started off, in the reverse. I started my own studio. I
Mhm.
did that for 6.5 years. Then I went on to doing things in other places. So I've been same thing, kind of worn many hats. Being a founder, done hiring, done tech, did basically everything except art. So saw things when they were small. I was there when mobile just started, probably very similar to you, where you could put anything out and make some money. To
Yeah.
now, everything is at scale. Right.
Yes.
All right. Right. So that's kind of very, very briefly where I've been and what I've done. So okay. So product. So simply put, the easiest way I can define product management is when you're trying to define and execute the vision of the game, right?
Mm.
So we'll just talk in terms of game. Let's not bring in anything else here.
Yeah.
So let's say that, hey, I want to make an FPS, which seems to be sort of everybody wants to make a Far Cry 6 or a GTA 5. So
Mhm.
let's start there. Let's just use that, right? So what a product manager typically does is say, all right, this is the end product. What are the different bits and pieces that really go in?
Mm.
uh, like, okay, what's the game's experience going to look like? Now, that's a lot of things that a designer also does, and that actually defining what the user is going to do in while playing the game is on the designer. However, where a product manager comes in is typically saying, okay, if this is how we're going to design the game, what's that experience going to feel like, right? So another very commonly adapted definition is the product manager is usually the voice of the users. So
Mm.
people inside of the team, developers, designers, artists, are trying to make this game, this experience, while product managers will often say, hey, this looks good on paper, but what is the user going to do? How is it going to affect them? How are they going to react to us, right? That's one of the roles. Another very commonly applied role for product managers is to understand the business of games.
Mm.
So there, a product manager will very often hold P&L. So how much are we spending? How much are we making? Is this game profitable? How do we scale it? How do we get more users? Things like that. And the third bit is usually product managers come in from one of two segments. From what I've seen, they either come from a technical background or from a design background. So
Yeah.
there's usually, if you're looking at this like a Venn diagram, you've got business on one front, you've got user voice in the second, and you've got either tech or design on the third. The
Mm.
intersection of all these is what really a product manager does on a day-to-day basis. Uh, in terms of role, PMs are usually never decision makers. They are
Mm.
more of guides. It's very closely to this thing of you're cheering everybody on, but
Mm.
you have no absolute power. Like a lead developer can say, hey, this is how you have to write this section. You're designing an API, you're going to implement it. Okay, ये API को ऐसे ही बनाना है. That's what a lead
Right.
developer can say. Same thing goes with a game designer or lead game designer, where they can say, all right, this is how we're going to design it. PMs usually never have that kind of power over the rest of it. I'm using power, but not in a negative connotation. Just saying that typically it's more of a convincing job, right? It's more of, I think this feature will work because of one, two, and three. And then you present your evidence, your research. It could be what other games are doing. You could be using business intelligence tools to sort of do that, to convince your team. Then you'll get sign-offs from your executives when you say, okay, it's going to cost us so much. So
Yeah.
can we do this? Right.
Hmm.
So PMs are usually that kind of interfacing people. Um, and the other type of person like that would be producers. So very similar in terms of how the hierarchy works. Producers and PMs usually are just ICs. They work by themselves, and they try to get the team to sort of come together.
Yeah. So I think that's perfect. But you touched on a very important point, because you get to hear product and product managers in the tech ecosystem, but very less in the gaming ecosystem. And producers are a much common sort of a designation, title, or at least a job description in the gaming ecosystem, right? So, sort of our audience who might not be kind of familiar with what might be certain nuances, because if even if they are developers, right, they will have to work with product managers, they'll have to work with producers, designers, artists, and whatnot, right? So how would you classify if there is any core responsibility split between what would eventually fall on a producer's plate versus what would be on a product manager's plate?
All right. Let's take it in context of how you would a live game would work, for example, right? Let's say that the design team comes up with this new feature, and they say, hey, this is going to be a killer feature, and we think users are going to enjoy it. And we'll make some money off it.
Yeah.
So the product manager now will actually sit down and try to figure out whether the feature makes sense from a business perspective. So that might mean using tools, available data that's on certain websites that you can pull up and say that, hey, these guys did it and their revenue went up. That's one example, right? All right. Now that portion's done. What a producer will do at this point is actually sit down and break up that feature into very minute tasks and say, acha, we're going to ship this feature that's this big, that's going to take us 3 months to do. What are the separate tasks? What are the developers doing? What are the designers doing? What are the artists doing? And how does that break down into small segments? So saying, oh, okay, we're going to do a new UI for this feature. All right, what goes into that UI? What are the individual bits that go to the UI, right? So these are all the things that the producer will typically talk to the team about.
Yeah.
And that's what ends up in what is called the roadmap. So a product manager is defining or helps define this high level long-term vision for a game. So this feature that we just talked about is one small portion of the roadmap. The product manager says that, okay, this feature looks important. Let's try to do it. The producer is now responsible for actually executing it and saying, okay, this is a feature. This is how we're going to do it. So the product manager defines the what and the producer defines the how.
Correct. Yeah. No, I think that's very spot on, right? Like thinking around how something gets built, and that, if there is a feature, you will need art, you'll need design, you'll need engineering, you'll need music, you'll need animation, all of these things to kind of come together, right? And somebody needs to be the central person who is kind of be able to sort of act as a glue between all of these pieces. You guys need to implement this, right? Designers, you guys need to figure out this, and then artists, you guys need to give this so that now the engineers can implement this, right? So all of that mechanics is basically what a producer's role essentially is, right? So there, once something is concrete that, okay, this needs to be implemented, it's a producer's job to make sure that the rest of the team is essentially doing what needs to be done in order to get to that thing being available in your app or exe or Play Store or whatever, right? So
correct.
Yeah, perfect. So I think there are a bunch of questions that are already popping up, and this was really interesting because I know for a fact that majority of people don't understand the difference between product and production, and how does data work and analytics work and all those pieces, right? Before I start taking up questions from the audience, you earlier mentioned, right, like one of the roles of a product manager is also to figure out how to acquire users and how to sort of scale up users, and whether the revenue is going to scale up and whether this is going to become profitable, right? So even yesterday on our session, somebody was asking a similar, like we were discussing a similar topic around viability of like small studios, indie studios competing with some of the bigger companies, etc. Right? So this notion of building games from a technology perspective is on one side, but then how do you actually turn it into a viable business where you can think about putting in money and then generating? So how, even though whether you're working for yourself or you're working for another studio, how do you think about this equation? What can you recommend to people when they're thinking about, should I put in money into a game so that it can eventually make money or not? How would you go about sort of advising folks?
Um, okay, that's actually a very tough answer to tough question to answer very concisely, but I'm going to try. Uh, the way I do it and the way I have always done it is to build an MVP, or that's minimal
Mm,
viable product for everybody else.
yeah.
So you build a bare bone version, right? Like when I say bare bones, I mean using Unity's primitives to build stuff. Don't go and make art for it. Don't make a UI for it. Cubes use karo, cubes, cylinders, ये सारा use करके game बनाओ,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So that's where you start, right? The easiest way is word of mouth.
Mm,
Start with friends and family. Figure out whether or not your game is fun to play, because that's at the core of every game, right? A game cannot make money. A game cannot be profitable if it is not fun. End of story. There is no such thing as it's a bad game and it still makes money. That doesn't
mm,
exist. It can exist in the film industry, where people will go and watch the latest Salman Khan movie even if it is panned, even if it
yeah.
has got like a zero point 0.5 rating. People will still go and watch it. बकवास मूवी है चलेगा, पर भाई एक्टिंग कर रहा है तो जाके देखो. ये इसमें होता नहीं है. So game industry is very very gamers, casual to hardcore, are typically very passionate and they know what they want. So you need to be able to deliver that. So that's
Mm,
the very very basic stuff. Now once you get past that phase, it's actually starting to build a product. There again, it's about focusing on what we in the industry, what is defined as the core loop, uh,
mm,
where it's you're providing the very core of the experience. So if it's a shooter, don't focus on 11,000 guns. Don't focus too much on the environment. Build
mm.
one gun, make it fun, right? If it's a team shooter, 5v5 banana hai, 2v2 banao दोगे, right?
Yep.
Don't think about what happens if मेरे को इसमें battle royale बनाना है 100 लोग. Don't worry about that right now, right? Build the bare minimum. Now comes the more sort of capital intensive part, where
The
you
business.
start marketing. Yeah, the business side of things, where you have to actually start marketing. Now there are plenty of paid channels, and this is a huge topic, a separate literally hours long worth of discourse, not even a discussion but a discourse by itself. But you advertise. That's the easiest way of acquiring users. So what most developers or publishers will do is soft launch the game, which means take your game and give it to a very very limited audience. Put it
Yes.
out to a very limited audience. Like for example, if you're you want to target the West, Canada on iOS is a very very popular option,
Mm,
because people, the spending patterns, how much people earn, how much people spend on games, how long they play games for, how do they play games every day or weekends, jo bhi hai, the customer's behavior is
yeah.
extremely similar in Canada and the Western world. Now, if you want to release a game in India, it's very often that you will soft launch in Pakistan and Bangladesh, because again,
Right.
similar economies, similar people. Now you go into the whole this thing of keep iterating, keep making your game better.
Mm,
This is where a PM really kicks in and says, okay, I thought that the ye game 10 minutes chalna chahiye tha, but people are playing it for 3 minutes and running away. What's wrong? So now a
mm,
PM will sit down and figure out what's actually going wrong, where everybody is, and what's what seems to be the problem, and then you fix them. You try fixing it, you try addressing it, you update your game, and then you look at data again. You
right.
continue doing that. Now, soft launches these days are literally in years. They are no longer in months or weeks; they are in years. Supercell, for example, is
Yeah.
notorious for running year-long under different studio names. They'll run soft launches, and then they might even kill the game. So
Correct.
this is kind of where it is. And
Mm,
then, if everything goes well, you launch, and then you hope to make money.
correct. No, I think the point around soft launch is very, because when I was in Jungli, we were launching this eatme.io, which was a real-time multiplayer, 100 people playing together, eating each other in an underworld kind of an adventure, right? So we did the same thing, but for us, we launched it in US, sorry, in New York, New Zealand. New Zealand and Australia as our sort of soft launch market, and we tested the game out for at least 3 months there before we actually launched it in the US. And even then, also in US, you only enabled it to a few cities and a few regions, and then eventually opened it up to the entire audience as well. So very similar to that, right? But a
Right.
lot of this journey is actually very true for more mid-core and large-scale game, right? But if you look at the
Yes.
hyper-casual or the indie segment, right, what would your advice be? Because there you have the publishers on one side versus self-publishing on the other side, right?
Right. So if it's, I'll try to answer this separately. If it's indie games, if you're just making an indie non-mainstream game, build hype with your friends, build hype with your family, join Discord, join Twitter
Hmm.
if you're not already there, and keep promoting your game, right? Talk about it shamelessly, right? I made this little new feature. Talk about it, right?
Yep.
Create a discussion there, right? Get others to give you feedback. That's basically how indie games market. You will usually have a shoestring budget or no budget. You will
Yeah.
very, very rarely have a good strong budget, right? Unless you have a publisher.
Hmm.
Hell, go and make a Kickstarter campaign. Let it fail. It doesn't matter, right? Even if your end goal is, I hope it makes it, it doesn't matter, because you're still getting this you're getting eyeballs on the game, right? People are showing interest. And even if your campaign fails, it doesn't matter. You now know how many people are interested. You're creating discussions, you're listening to potential customers, right? Not users, remember, customers are people who will pay you money. Users are just people who will
Hmm.
play the game. So there is a vast difference between these two. So you have potential customers telling you what they already like or don't like, and that's invaluable information. Now with hyper casuals, it's a very different ballgame. I would my this is my opinion, and I can't stress that enough. Hyper casuals, do not attempt it without a publisher. Do
Hmm.
not attempt it, because it is bound to fail. Because you could be successful. Does I'm not saying it's 100% failure rate, but the odds are heavily stacked against you,
Yeah.
and that's because of the sheer amount of data that hyper casual publishers actually have already.
Hmm.
So they've got an extreme number of users. They can scale a game that's come out today to be
Yeah.
one or two tomorrow. That is not something you can do by yourself.
Yeah.
So
Unless you end up being a fluke success,
yeah,
that
that's entirely
kicks
possible,
off in
right?
turn. But
Yeah,
you can't bank
that's
on
the
that
yeah,
as a
exactly.
recipe for success, right?
It's a very minor chance of success. You could create a Flappy Bird, but remember, Flappy
Exactly.
Bird was also existed pre hyper casual times,
Yeah.
pre all this, these hyper casual studios like Voodoo, Supersonic,
Correct.
etc. All of these guys already there, having data, having users. It just makes so much more sense to
Hmm.
create a prototype, take it to them, and say, "Hey, play this game. Do you think you like it?" It's
Yeah.
faster.
Correct. No, I think that's the same advice I would give to anyone as well. It's very hard to make it a sustainable, reliable business if you are trying to pump out a lot of hyper casual games. You'll always be better. And once you are able to break a deal with any of the publisher, more or less they will fund your next game and the
Correct.
next game, etc. as
Correct.
well, right? Or
Correct.
you will
Correct.
earn enough money from the game one in if it becomes a top 10 on the leaderboards, right? Kind of a scenario, then you'll earn enough money to actually fund the
Self fund.
development,
Exactly.
and then go to even other publishers if you have to, right? So,
Correct.
so going via a publisher where you're not investing $100,000 a day on marketing budget, which
Yeah.
most of us won't have, right? So unless you're a
Ex-
big corporation, you're just not going to have that kind of a budget.
Correct.
So yeah, good. So let me jump into some of the questions that came in. I know there are a few. So I think Rishi is asking, how do you think about balance between developers' vision for the game and the desire of the fans, especially when you think about sort of uh, bigger game franchises?
Mhm. That's a tough one. So there's always more opinions than options, right? But end of the day, if you do something that's very unpopular,
Mhm.
then you've got to think about it as the game won't exist anymore. People will just not play it, and
Yeah,
this has happened very often. Recent times, I can think of how like how Assassin's Creed, for example, has evolved. uh, Developers in this instance, developers made a very controversial kind of decision to go away from what Assassin's Creed stood for.
yeah.
uh, so they lost a lot of their old fan base, myself
Me,
included. Yeah.
me.
Yeah, so I'm assuming you're about my age, so
Yep,
we played Assassin's Creed in 2007,
yep.
where it was a different game, and now it's just
Correct.
like, Assassin's Creed का नाम ले लिया, game दूसरा बना दिया. So
Exactly.
it's that, right? So that's a marketing gimmick. Then there will also be times when the reverse applies, where developers do actually listen to users.
Hmm.
बहुत गाली मिलता है, but they do listen to them. So it's kind of a balancing act in figuring out what you can do and what you can get away with to an extent,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Like one example is Diablo Immortal. So it looks fine, but no real Diablo player is going to play it.
Yeah.
But that's not who they're making the game for. So again, controversial, but they're listening to the users to an
Correct.
extent.
Yeah, yeah. I think I totally agree. Like especially when the Assassin's Creed series launched the naval combat stuff in, I
Black
think
Flag.
Black Flag, right?
That was Black Flag, yes.
Yeah. So I gave up the entire series after that. I never played any AC game after it because I was a hardcore AC 1, 2 fan. Ezio Auditore was my like Steam character name for forever, right? So like it's the same thing when you love the original appeal of the game, which was all about stealth assassination and everything. Suddenly you end up listening to the customers who want more diversity in the game and different kind of gameplay. If you think if the studio decided that that's the most smart decision to or smart direction to go into as well because of multiple reasons, but then they will have made this conscious choice knowing that they will lose an X percentage of their original hardcore fan base
Correct.
that aligned with that notion of being a
Correct.
stealthy ninja. No, not a ninja, but a stealthy assassin, right?
That's right.
So good. So I think that's definitely like a balancing thingy. Okay, let me just quickly scan through the questions. What are the qualifications to be a producer or a product manager in this case? Like you
Okay.
can probably just elaborate a little bit on both.
All right. So producers, the line starts at project management. Most product managers will and producers will typically have some kind of business degree. You can either start in tech or in design. Like you can, if you're doing, if you're coming from tech, you can do a B Tech, whatever, and then go get into an MBA, and then you can choose which way to go. Right. Producers also typically will get certifications like Scrum certifications, Agile certifications, things like that. Product managers will go more towards the technical certifications like learning more SQL, learning Python, learning R, more of your data science kind of programming
Hmm.
languages.
Hmm.
So that's where the split kind of happens. But at the entry point, having an MBA really helps, especially if you're going for the larger, brand names, Ubisoft, EA, Zynga, all of these guys. Typically, they will tell you need to have an MBA.
Right, right. Yeah, I think I'm not sure if the bigger studios are moving away from the MBA notion yet or not.
Kind of, but not. It's more often than not. And in India, it's different when you compare it to the rest of the world.
Hmm.
I'm talking at a global scale. In India right now, there is a dearth of two professions, right? One is product managers, and the second is UA.
Hmm.
People don't know how to do marketing for games. People don't know how to do
Yeah,
product for games. So
correct.
these two, and that's because of our culture. It's
Hmm.
the past 30 years we've been great at making stuff. We have a huge talent of engineers, IT. Now we're building that for games. Like you guys
Yeah,
are doing that for games, and others are doing it for games. But nobody in the past 3 decades has actually tried to make games in India at scale.
yeah.
We've always kind of taken instruction, like at Zynga it will be somebody in the US,
Hmm.
the lead game designers in the US, and he's saying this is how the game needs to be designed.
Yeah.
So we are basically kacha hai hum log, bolte
Hmm.
hain. Kacha hai. We're bad at it, and we're bad at it currently. That can change when we start making games here, when we start doing things in India, in house. These things change. Product management also is a very fairly recently popular kind of role to have.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to be a product manager without really understanding what it is.
Hmm.
Same thing with UA. We don't understand marketing. India as a country is very, very bad at doing good marketing. So
Hmm.
these two roles, once they start filling out over the next several years, 3, 5, 6 years, then you will start seeing a huge improvement there.
True. That's true. No, I think that's 100% sort on. Um, Part of Outscale sort of bigger vision is that how can we systematically solve what we are doing for game developers but for other functions within the gaming industry, because we know this is a very real problem. Gaming industry is just going bonkers and it's exploding, but there is no talent, right? Like I had Manish from Manish, the CEO of Nazara Games, couple of
Gulwal,
weeks
yeah.
back on a conversation, and he was saying the exact same thing. There's no game designers to hire. There's literally
Correct.
nothing in the market,
Actually,
right? There's
actually let me pose this. That's more of a hiring thing, right? That's you already
Mhm,
gone further down into the problem. I'll tell you my high level issue with the whole
mhm,
thing in India, right? India is the third largest in terms of bodies working in game development, following US
mhm.
and China.
Yeah.
However, we still don't have a single billion-dollar game.
Hmm.
That's food for thought.
Yeah.
There are out of $23 billion games that exist, as of 2019, perhaps seven of them come from Finland. Seven games come from Finland, and from two studios.
Yeah.
This is a country which has less population than a couple of our states,
Yep.
and they're putting out seven games that make over $1 billion each.
Hmm.
We as a country have been unable to do it, regardless of talent, regardless of how
Yeah.
populated we are, what opportunities we have. That's a big problem.
Yep. I think that's not just a gaming problem as well, right? Like the same
Yeah,
problem is actually mirrored in the tech ecosystem.
in the tech
Now it's like
ecosystem, absolutely.
now you're
But
seeing just the very first inklings of companies, tech companies, hardcore tech companies going IPOs, right? Like literally
yeah,
Nagara had their IPO this year,
this year,
Zomato,
yeah, Zomato did
etc.
it.
Right?
I mean,
So Paytm's
recent,
lining up, Baiju's lining up, but
yeah,
but like look at the US ecosystem and the Europe, there's just like batshit crazy number of IPOs
correct,
happening,
correct,
right? People
correct.
have faith in tech and confidence in tech, and here we still have social dilemma of, hey, gaming is for noobs. Who does
Yeah,
gaming? That's not even a serious job. We still are stuck in that loophole where where your grandmom might be
Engi-
playing freaking Ludo for 30 minutes every day, but they still don't want
but
their
it's
kids
not a
to go
career.
into games.
Yeah,
It's
it's
not a
not a career.
career.
Engineer
Somebody
बनो, doctor बनो या failure बनो, यही तीन
correct.
profession है. Yeah.
True. Well, half of the engineers end up being failures as well, but that's separate anyways. Anyways, okay, cool, perfect. So I think there was one interesting question. I think it went up a little bit in the chat. How how do you think about sort of cross-platform games from a product perspective, right? Like the question Karthik asked is slightly different from a hardware requirement perspective, but I'm just going to broaden the scope up so that you can share a more broader perspective. But like when you think about cross-platform games, uh, launching simultaneously on either iOS, now there is Epic Store, Steam, etc., right? How do you think from a product perspective, what are the kind of considerations that you have to make into account if you're marketing on Android and iOS and Steam and blah, 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 right?
So, yeah, a couple of things there. So the first thing is you want your experience kind of unchanged.
Hmm.
That I think is what every team, not just the PM, but every team will need to nail. So
Hmm.
if you're playing Genshin Impact on your phone
Yeah.
and you're playing the same thing, you're just kind of cross playing it on your PC. It shouldn't feel like an entirely different game. Now, there are several studios who get this so badly wrong that
Mm-hmm.
they build a game for console. They spend 5 years in building a game for a console, and then they say, "Oh, let's also launch it on Steam." And they
Hmm.
think it's a अच्छा controller का map कर दो यार keyboard पे बात खत्म हो गया.
Yes.
It's not the same thing. So
Hmm.
it's the experience that you're driving. Game sessions differ. The mood differs. What the user is coming there for differs. So you need to have that kind of vision. Saying
Correct.
that, okay, my users need to not just be similar. Like I could be a hardcore mobile gamer, but a very light, PC gamer. I could be playing solitaire.
Hmm. Hmm.
That crossplay game is not for me. But if I'm playing, these kind of mid-core games on phones, I'm playing shooters on phones, I'm playing shooters on PC. Now I'm a customer. So you need to be able to
Hmm.
first is you need to be able to reach out to the same kind of users. Second thing is that experience has to absolutely match. It shouldn't feel great on a console and horrible on a PC. It shouldn't
Hmm.
feel like Arma on PC. Arma on PC, मेरे पास अभी भी वो एक ये है, where I've got like 7 different pages of keyboard shortcuts. I can't play the damn game without looking at it. This
Yeah.
is so that shouldn't happen. Arma is one of those great examples of
Hmm.
how not to do that,
Yeah.
how not to do it, right? And there are several others, but this is one of those things. That's number two. Number three is hardware requirements do matter. Like
Hmm.
if you're building a AAA title on console, you've got more memory, you've got more graphic bandwidth, you've got more storage. You can't run this on an Android mid-range device that costs like 12,000
Hmm.
bucks.
Hmm.
Redmi Note 10 पे नहीं चलेगा. So you better will not go and launch it there.
Yeah.
That's like harakiri कर रहे हो. मत करो.
Right. Right.
So targeting. So that's those three things I suppose.
Perfect. Perfect. Good. So, any sort of pointers for, because since you've already launched your own studios, you've worked as a founder as well, you've hired a lot of talent in the past, and I'm sure now also you're part of the a lot of the active hiring pipeline as well, right? So how do you think about young talent, especially in the tech ecosystem, coming into games, etc., right? What's the kind of advice that you would part to them in terms of how to prepare best for entering into the gaming ecosystem?
All right. So a few things. So first is make your own games, right?
Hmm.
Show that you can make it. Don't say that I like games, I want to make games, hire me. That never
Yes.
works, right? Go and upskill yourself. Now, a lot of you are here, so I'm assuming that you're already serious about it. You're listening to this discussion, so it means that you have intent. But you got to also prove that intent.
Yeah.
Just listening is not enough. Doing is more important. That's number one. Number two, don't make a dev game, right? Don't make a game, make a prototype. This is going against what I said, but your prototypes can use Unity primitives. But if you're showing this off to the world, do not make a dev UI.
Hmm.
Spend a little bit of time with your artist friends. Otherwise, go use, download something like Kenny's Game Assets. It's free. Go
Yeah.
to the Unity Asset Store, get some free stuff. At worst, you spend $10 on buying things which make your game look good.
Hmm.
Third, focus on polish. 80% of your game will get done in 20% of your time. The other 80% of your time, spend on polish. Make
Yeah.
that menu transition, make those menu transitions great. Don't let the game lag. Don't let it drop below 60 FPS. Don't let it crash. Do all of these things. If you're focusing on mobile, then build it on a phone. Make
Hmm.
sure it's playable on a phone.
Yeah.
This is how you build your portfolio. Then start reaching out, right? Do not ask for opportunities before you have something to show. That's
True.
usually career harakiri. You don't want to do it, right? Because people then see, a lot of people, even if they want to give a chance, they will not, because people see hundreds of applicants a day. And
Yeah.
that's the truth. That's the truth. Everybody has finite time. Everybody understands that you're taking effort, but it also needs to be worth the other person's time. So if you have a bad first impression, uh, going to be harder for you to get yourself out of that. So focus on making a very good game. However, that doesn't mean don't talk to anybody before. Network.
Yeah.
Open your LinkedIn's, open Discord, and connect with people and talk to people. Like I
Yep.
said, when you're making a game, talk about it. Keep talking about it. Keep showing progress. You
Yeah.
will start showing up in the right circles. And
True.
then once you're ready, apply.
So it's funny that you mentioned all of these things, because we have our Discord community. We encourage everybody to, no matter what they do, just share their progress updates on LinkedIn, because then people will start to recognize that, oh, this person is a game developer, and people are, when people join our program, right? Like the very first day, the first thing, literally the first thing, is not to open up and install Unity. It's not to learn C++ or C Sharp. It's actually to set up your LinkedIn account. Like
Correct.
literally, that's the very first thing. And people are shocked. Like, wait, what the fuck? We came here for a technical program and you're telling us LinkedIn. What the hell is this shit, right? So people just
Correct.
don't understand the. They never are exposed in the right way to the power of networking, power of leveraging at least LinkedIn in a professional context as a right social media platform, right?
Correct.
And like literally the other day, just 2 days back, this happened, that two people from clans that we haven't yet finished their entire program, so which means that their placement drive hasn't officially started, and they already have job offers. Why? Because they had been posting about their progress for the last 50 days, 2 months, non-stop, every day. Like
Correct.
doesn't matter what happens, they're publishing their progress out. But people just like heavily underestimate the power of showcasing and learning in open. Like we like I know the startup mentality talks about building in open. We phrase it internally as learn in open. Even
Correct.
if you failed miserably and you didn't do anything, you were stuck on one bug, right? Throw it out to the rest of the world. The rest of the world, somebody might come in and jump in and help, right? You never know what kind of people are out there who are looking at you, and then they might come back and say, oh, looks like you are building some kick-ass stuff.
Yeah.
Do you want to interview for a job? That shit happens so many times.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I hire people like that all the time. That's why I'd say this. When I see people showing intent and they're following through
Yep.
on it, when people are saying day 28 out of 120 coding challenge. I'm now
Exactly.
following that person. I follow that person and I keep checking. Har din post karta hai kya ye?
Yes.
Otherwise people will just like randomly ek din post kiya, 10 din gayab, and then 11th day you get mood aa gaya, you open up Visual Studio, you open up Unity, and then you make a
Yeah.
couple of, you push a couple of changes, and that person, no, that's not good. You
Yep.
won't survive.
True, true. Perfect. So I think this was a very helpful conversation. I know we overshot the time, so my apologies there.
No problem.
And thanks again for taking out the time. I think there are a few more questions that were more sort of program specific, so I just glanced over it. Guys, don't worry. I'll come back and answer those questions later regarding the program XP and all. I don't want to take the time right now to answer those as well, but a bit we'll come back to it, right? So perfect, Venkat. Thanks again for sharing your time and expertise. And this is a very insightful conversation because I know for a fact that majority of people just don't understand the difference in the context of what product management is, what a product manager does, etc. as well. So, this was a lovely conversation and would love to have you back again sometime, maybe in a few months' time or something.
Absolutely. I mean, my pleasure for being here. Thank you for having me. Uh, Thanks everyone for listening. I know this is not your typical thing. I'm very cynical. So thanks for having me and listening. And if I will share my email address with the Outscale
Mhm.
team, they have it. If
Yeah.
there are any questions, feel free to get in touch with me directly or through them. More than willing to have answer questions. And best of luck. I hope you all do very, very well and have great careers ahead.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
And
everyone. Yeah.
if there are any questions, I'll collect them and probably share it to you or email directly as well.
All right. Thanks.
Perfect. Perfect.
Have
All
a good
right.
evening,
Take care,
guys. Yeah.
Venkat.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right. Awesome. So hopefully everybody had a fun interactive session. I know I missed a couple of questions, but guys, just don't copy paste the same question over and over again. I'm not pointing out names, but you guys know who you are.